a second for Chief Minibariat to introduce herself as well, because she's my co-presenter for this session.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Chief Minibariat Christine of Cooks Ferry here in BC Interior, and just happy to be here. I've been chief of my community of about 350 members for 4 years. Just got placed back in the position for another 4-year term. So it's been an interesting go over the last little bit, but happy to be here.
So I'll just pull up my presentation. Elsie, do we need to wait a little bit before we get going for people to trickle in, or should we just launch right into it?
You could get right into it.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we're here to talk about some lands and consultation department success stories, and with a particular focus on Cooks Ferry Indian Band, who Chief Christine is the chief of, as she mentioned, and I work as the contract lands director of out in Southern Interior BC. So just a quick little agenda so you know what you're getting into here. Chief is going to talk a little bit more about Cooks Ferry Indian Band's story and how they arrived at development of a lands department there. And I will talk some more about what a lands and consultation department does, some thoughts on how to structure an effective lands and consultation department, ways to deal with the flood of consultation referrals that come into departments like these from industry and government. A little bit about funding sources and about outsourcing one's lands department to a third party or with support from a third party, and then we'll get into questions. I'll also mention that in a second, I'm going to ask you to jump over to another website called slido.com, and I'm going to give you a code to be part of an online survey that will just help to for us to identify a little bit about what your experience is with lands and consultation departments, where you're at with development of one, and couple of other things. So we've got sort of 2 key questions that we'd like to just do a quick little poll on. That information will be coming, but you may want to crack open your browser and go to slido.com, and then we'll get into that in a second. So I also just want to point out that everything we're going to be talking about today is also in a free ebook we have called Built to Last, a Lands and Consultation Department Guidebook. And if you want to download that to visit, and I think Elsie's going to stick this link in the chat as well, you just go to our website at Shared Value Solutions and click on the page for ebooks. Just a little bit about my firm. We're an environmental and community development consulting firm, and we work exclusively for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities across Canada. We work alongside our clients, for and with our clients, providing technical guidance, regulatory advice, environmental and socioeconomic peer reviews of major development proposals and documentation. We do community planning work, and we advise on strategy when our clients are negotiating with industry about major resource development projects. And of course, we also do work supporting our clients with developing and refining and organizational development of their lands and consultation departments. We're a company of Indigenous and non-Indigenous consultants with background in environmental science, cultural heritage, planning, and regulatory expertise. And our focus is on braiding Indigenous knowledge with Western science, and always to advance our clients' goals of prosperity, stewardship, and jurisdiction. So that's us. And Chief, is there anything else you would like to say about Cooks Ferry Indian Band?
Well, as I mentioned, we're in the interior of BC, and I often refer to not only our community, but Indigenous communities as being like the pepper flakes in a salt bowl. Our little reserves are just small in comparison to the surrounding traditional territory. Cooks Ferry has 26 reserves, and they're scattered in and among the Thompson and Nicola River system and spread out far between. So our community is not all in one spot. We have 360-ish members, but about 80% of those members live off reserve. And the influx of referrals that come to our community has been massive. It's constant paperwork that we're required to respond on to. And it's not just, as the referral system is, it's not just for your reserve lands, it's the territory as a whole. So we're a complex sort of community, and our jurisdictions are a bit of a mess. We are within 3 different forest districts, and then policing districts, as well as health agencies. It's a bit of a pickup sticks in our home here. So it's quite a complex response system that we need to have. We have had experiences working with neighboring bands and to have companies that technically respond to our referrals. And we felt that we needed a political response as well. So that's where we brought in SVS. But on the whole of it, Cooks Ferry is one very small nation. And we're just realizing that we need more capacity, and have experienced through the last 3 years the impacts of COVID even to capacity, and all parts of our organization, including our land referral process. I think we're going to get into a bit more of it a little bit later, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chief. All right, so I'm going to ask you, as I mentioned before, to go to slido.com and enter the code that's up in the top right of the slide that's in front of you, 902-7725. You should see a blue field to enter that code on the front page of slido.com. And I'm just going to unshare and jump over to that website and make sure that everything is ready to go. So that is now live. The first question, which is, where is your nation on the spectrum of lands and consultation department development? Are you up and running? Are you in development? Are you getting started? Or are you considering starting? And if you happen to be an advisor or a consultant for a nation, you can also respond from the nation's perspective on what stage they're at. So I'm not seeing anybody responding yet. So maybe just a quick check-in to make sure that you aren't having technical problems. Okay, maybe maybe this isn't the best venue to be doing an online poll. So I'm gonna switch back because I don't see any results coming in, and I'll skip the next slide with this survey. Maybe we can just talk a little bit more once we get into the questions and answers at the end. Sorry, just fumbling around here. All right, so I'll pass the baton over to Chief Minabariat about your opening thoughts on the case for a lands and consultation department. If there's anything you haven't mentioned already.
So my experience with referral process it actually goes way back into my early employment as like a referral technician, not even a referral technician. I was out on the land gathering information for the lands department at the time, which was part of a tribal council. So it was still removed from Cooks Ferry at that point, and I was just out there gathering information. And now reflecting back, not really thinking I understood at the time all the components of value in a referral system of what should have been noted and taken down to support the arguments that our bands need to have in government process or even industry. After that, I was a bookkeeper for many years for our what we called Eshkanem Investments Joint Venture, which was a group of First Nations locally that did the technical response for referrals for, I think, 3 of our communities. And so I've seen the volume of referrals that come into our organizations, and then being the financial office for that organization, I've seen which referrals are supported with funding and the massive amounts that aren't supported by funding, but yet still needing a response. Flip forward a few years later, I'm in council for Cooks Ferry. I'm still working for that Eshkanem company, and I'm seeing there's a lack of a tie politically back to our band from the technical organization. But we then at the time had expertise in forestry and historical knowledge, having a long-term political lead. So there was a bit of a continuity at that time. And then when I became chief in 2018, I was trying to get into the referral process of responding and seeing gaps where there wasn't a political response. The technical might have been provided to the proponent and or government, but it wasn't really coming back to Cooks Ferry, and really seeing a missed opportunity in many circumstances for either capacity dollars to support our response, but really seeing the cumulative effects of all of these referrals on our territory and really feeling left out of those conversations. So to answer that question in the chat, when we're saying referrals, are you meaning requests for consultation from proponents? Yes, that's any engagement a proponent has requesting our input and basically consent to do their project. So what we wanted to see here was not just the technical response, but we wanted to tie the political in and really have a say on the territory and what happens, build on the ability to have capacity in-house to do it with our own people, and also leaning on the UNDRIP and other components to get the accommodation factor of these projects that are happening in the territory coming back to the band, so that it's not just a take process. And so that's what we envisioned with building our own internal lands office, is to support us to get in that position with true expertise, because we might be knowledgeable about the territory and certain activities, but with industry and consultants and all those activities that happen out on the land base, there's so many different environmental and technical aspects that leadership may not have in their toolbox, but bringing in a lands office, you have the ability to support your position with those expertise. So that was really what inspired bringing on a lands office internally, and having both the political and the technical speaking to each other so that we could truly address in a whole perspective a lot of this consultation.
Thanks, Chief. So first off, I think Chief Christine has touched on this a little bit, but wanted to get do an overview of what a lands and consultation department often does. So we've talked about the need to respond to requests for engagement from industry and government, and a key part of this work involves screening, reviewing, and responding to those requests. And we're going to be talking a little bit later in the presentation about some approaches for processes to decide how to prioritize these things as they come in as a key strategy for making the best of the process. Also meeting with industry, regulators, or other third parties to discuss or co-develop plans, procedures, policy, in some cases even input to legislation that may impact on rights and interests in the territory or may impact on matters on the reserve lands. Supporting other community departments or advisors to apply what I would call strategic pressure through the regulatory process. So how to work the system to make sure the band's interests are being addressed, and to really push for those accommodation measures, legitimate requirements for accommodation of the band because of impacts to rights or because of impacts to community lands. Informing community members of planned activities and engaging the community to understand their views and opinions on specific issues, and basically to manage all aspects of on-reserve lands and protect the rights, claims, interests, resources, and environment in the traditional territory. So it's a fairly broad job description. As Chief pointed out, it takes a fair breadth of expertise, and yet there's some really core elements to the time that is spent as a lands manager, lands director in a department like this, which we've laid out here. Whoops. Sorry, Chief. Is there anything else you wanted to add to this?
No, I think we've covered this. Really, it takes everything. Like one of the things that I keep noting to a lot of the proponents and or even government that comes to speak to myself, for example, even on the emergencies that we've had with the flooding, one example I used today is it's the chief they want in the aircraft to go and point out all the critical places of interest and concern. But my expertise is now these four walls. So we need to really get out there with our membership and get their information to inform the work that the technical folks do to really inform that entire response. It takes a well-organized team to really respond in a whole focused method to these requests.
So we also want to talk about benefits and end goals. So the Chief's already talked about the need to have accommodation for impacts to rights. There's also just a general desire to participate economically and socially in the benefits of development that are happening in the territory. And certainly there's some really good recent stories from the Chief's efforts and efforts of other advisors working for the community on economic development. And so the tie between the lands department and that economic development piece is really working to ensure that the community is having a real say in getting a fair share of development. And so that's leveraging the community's rights and territory and ongoing exercise of rights and skill sets and knowledge to to bring that to bear on the process. Really, the benefits and end goals are around those things that I mentioned a minute ago, but I'll pass it over to the chief to talk about specific benefits and end goals and maybe some of those recent stories.
A lot of the success I've seen, I think, is membership are more vocal now. They see that they have a place to have a voice. They're learning more about the positives that could come from development of certain industries. There's a lot of mining that happens in our area. We've been hit really hard with mountain pine beetle in the past. So now we're seeing the impacts of that 10 years after clear-cut logging has happened. And so we're able to use the expertise from our lands office to speak to Ministry of Forests or Ministry of Environment to really be creative with solutions and really tie projects where we're perhaps doing a cultural heritage study so that it doesn't just speak to one project. A lot of the projects we did with our former Eshkanem office was funded project-based funding, I'd say. So you'd be able to go out and do a TOS that was specific to a project. And so the information gathered there is very limited and it isn't expandable across many projects or the territory as a whole. But what we found through here is that there is more of an ability to interchange and cross over the goals and gathering that information from our membership. And we're finding the more responses go out, the better able we are now to stay on top of that conversation, because the response goes out and now we've started that conversation essentially. And with the lands office, there's more of an ability to stay on top of that. Whereas before we were still hung up with those other 300 referrals that came in for that day.
So I want to talk about some benefits from engaging in the regulatory process. And we talked about the need to leverage the process to make sure that there is proper accommodation, proper consultation, meaningful consultation. But there are some other benefits. So you need to kind of put a marker down with regulators and industry about your interest and willingness to have a voice and to protect your territory and interests. And although that may sound a little bit daunting when you're dealing with already a steady flood of these consultation referrals coming in, and they're, you're putting a marker down will likely lead to more. You will be making sure that you're catching the things you might have been missing before. And it becomes generally known that you are an advocate for your territory and your interests, and so those entities, government, industry sit up and pay attention to that. Another benefit is being involved in identifying measures to address ways that you may be impacted through mitigation, which would be things you do to minimize impacts, or avoidance measures, avoiding them altogether, or getting industry or government to agree to higher environmental standards, which, especially when it comes to industry and the development of agreements around environmental matters and other kinds of accommodation matters, that is a place that you can pursue going above and beyond the bar that the regulatory process is the bar. Creating economic benefits for the community, jobs training, contracting opportunities for community businesses, developing business partnerships, or even getting into things like revenue or profit sharing and equity or shares in a particular business that is developing within the territory. And having more influence if you feel you need to oppose a project, if it doesn't conform with the community's goals and values, if there are impacts which you just can't stomach, or that are really contrary to your plans for the future, you can have more influence in opposing the project if you've got the expertise on board to do that, and those ongoing relationships with government.
I think this last flood season, we've seen a really good example of this, in where our reserve is right adjacent to a rail line. And when the emergency happened and the Nicola River had flooded, it was one of the most significant floods in BC this last November, not last November, 2021. And the rail company came in and they were reinforcing their bridge. And in doing that, they seen the opportunity to go and reinforce our reserve without conversation to us. And our chief and counsel at the time was really upset by this, and really coming back to that, you need to have a position, you need to have respect essentially from proponents, and the rail line is no different. They need to respect the community, and we need to have say what happens on our lands. So we were in the stage of, we need to stop this project. And really, the lands department was able to support us in that conversation as to why we needed it stopped. We knew that work needed to be done, but it was up to us to direct and determine what work we wanted to have done. And so the lands office came in, and between the lands office, our political leads, and the rail company, we came out with a plan that not only met the rail company's needs, our needs, but also the needs of the fish. And through that, our lands office was able to help expedite some emergency permit work so that we could expedite that work. And then following all of that, we were able to employ community members to actually undertake some of that planting work and other mitigation that happened through that job. So it really demonstrated the strength that the lands office brought to the community in terms of being self-determining and really having control over our lands and having a say at what happens. And through the whole thing, we came out not only with that better product for our reserve lands, but also a better relationship with that rail company.
Thanks, Chief. That's a good story. So now we'll get into how to structure an effective lands and consultation department based on our experience. And I want to start by, in terms of structure, talking a bit about roles. And the roles on the left-hand side of this slide don't all have to be there, but in our experience, it's typical that you have somebody at the lands director level who's engaging with leadership, who's got that strategic viewpoint, who's got the 50,000-foot view on the development of the lands and consultation department, and isn't in the weeds completely on the stuff that's coming through the lands office, but has people that can flag that stuff for them when there's a need for their attention. Then there's a lands manager who's kind of in the middle, who's getting more into the weeds on the details, working to craft responses, working to identify needs, and then you have somebody at a coordinator or clerk level who is really looking at the lands inbox and the flow of requests coming through, making sure that the right people are informed of that flow of information, that are helping to do some of the more clerical or administrative duties that are required, paperwork for the lands office, to make sure that the lands manager and the lands director can keep their heads at the right level and not be in the weeds too much. And then occasionally there's a need to engage other technical experts to help to respond, to be out doing studies or monitoring on the land, and to be involved sometimes as part of community engagement. To may want to have an expert there to answer some questions from the community, along with your lands director and or folks from community leadership. So there's sometimes a need to expand the team and involve people with specific expertise. And it's my understanding that's part of why Chief Christine, I think as she mentioned earlier, brought us in, is so that she could have some core folks with experience in this role, but also some bench strength in terms of specific kinds of technical expertise when needed. And I know that Cooks Ferry also uses a number of other consultants as well from time to time for specific areas. And just sort of looking at the sort of multiple roles. I know if in this moment you feel like your entire lands department or who you're working for is a one-person show, just want to sort of take a moment to say, take heart. Everybody starts somewhere. Now is the perfect time to start building your department if you need it. We've got some great stuff at the end of this presentation around funding. I'm happy to say that we brought, I think, over $1 million now into the lands department for Cooks Ferry with the work of various people and administration, including the lands department. There's lots of funding out there for this right now, and we're at a watershed moment, I think, where industry, for the most part, finally understands that they've got to work closely and in partnership with Indigenous nations to move their projects forward. And basically all you need to do is respond and get the conversation started. So just want to provide a little inspirational moment there. One of the key parts of developing a lands office, and certainly my job, is to work on working my company out of a job as much as possible by investing in the capacity of folks at the local level, and to help build the information base and the traditional knowledge base that helps us do our job with the lands department. So I want to talk about that investment. I want to talk in particular about Brenda, who is our lands coordinator. So she is just finishing her master's. She spent her career working with local organizations who are involved in gathering and compiling and putting into useful formats for members traditional knowledge and cultural heritage information, and also being involved out of the land and doing archaeological and cultural heritage and environmental assessments of areas before development happens. She's very knowledgeable, and she's a real go-getter if you ever meet her. And it's our real privilege to have the chance to work with her, and very lucky that she applied for the job. Chief, I know you probably have lots you want to say about Brenda, and having somebody locally is an important part of this.
It is certainly helpful when you have somebody with a passion that just will take anything on and run with it. And just having that historical context, not only from personal life experience, but having that community-wide experience. She's been, like Scott mentioned, involved in other organizations, but the lead, the manager, so not just Cooks Ferry, but really looking after those interests for the territory as a whole for decades. So bringing that in-house to Cooks Ferry has really been a success story, and that passion. And as you'll read here on the slide, what I constantly go back to is providing people with value. If you don't have value, you don't really have a vested interest. And it's my belief that every one of my members has value. We may not all have master's degrees or even high school diplomas, but we have something that we are skilled in, and it contributes to what makes us a community and what makes us successful as a community. And when we acknowledge that, we move forward in a better way, and we start accomplishing more. We start being able to determine what might be outside the needs of just direct, generalized go-tos in terms of accommodation and such. For example, one of our economic opportunities had to do with employment in heavy-duty highway construction or reconstruction. We became partners with a few companies, and what we learned out of that arrangement was how to structure the benefits that come back to a community. And it turned out to be a success in that maybe not everybody wanted to be that heavy duty equipment operator, but the investment that they had back into our community allowed us to put efforts to other areas where they might be interested, whether it be office administration or something else. So it's bringing value back to membership, and it's not just A, B, and C. It can be a broad range of values. And we've seen that with bringing Brenda in, bringing local capacity in is a success. She has the connections and trust within the membership, so they're more willing and able to open up about what is really truly important to them. And it is in the intent to expand on that and bring that more fulsome. Hopefully there's no more emergencies and we can do it a little more smoothly in the coming year.
Thanks, Chief. So I'd like to get a little bit more into the weeds on how to screen and prioritize referrals and engagement requests, which is one of the focus areas in our ebook. And you'll see a lot more information in there that I'm going to cover today, but I just want to flag that it's in there. One of the ways we talk about the need for this, because I think this is one of the things that many nations are really struggling with, this flood of consultation referrals, and that piles up of these things really becomes a drain. It becomes a drain on resources, becomes a drain on people's feeling that they just can't ever get out from underneath it. And so one of the things we really want to put in place is ways to focus on what matters, and to focus on the referrals that matter in particular, and to turn that pile from a net drain to a net gain for the community, because looking for places where there are real opportunities for extracting benefits, for protecting the territory, and for economic development. One of the things I've just mentioned in that little circle on the right side is that one of the first things we often do as well is to make sure that all of the industry and government agency contacts are aware that there is a single point of contact for the band. And in most cases that's not the chief, unless the chief wants them to remain as the main point of contact. But as you saw from a quote earlier there's lots of different roles for the chief, and often development of a lands department is an effort to try to get some of these things off their plate. So making sure that there's a lands inbox and contact information, and it's recognized that the lands department is the key point of contact for these referrals as they come in. So we use a three-step process. First, we do what's called triaging, which you'll hear from hospital TV shows, ER-like TV shows is the way that comes from the medical profession. It's focusing on the injuries or urgencies that are most important first, and we do that. We develop a matrix, which I'll show you in a minute, that's based on importance and urgency. So making sure we can meet timelines or flag timelines when we need to get an extension. And we have a range of different criteria around what constitutes importance, whether it's where it is in the territory, proximity to the main community, whether it's impacts to certain core community values on the territory, such as lands and waters, or significant wildlife habitat, things of that nature. I'll go into our factoring on importance. The second is drafting the response. and part of the role of a lands director is to make sure that's of good quality and it's a consistent approach, and it's got some key elements to it, like a consistent way that the community is putting forward a description of its lands and territory and rights and interests and the basis for those every time a response goes out, so that is consistently being put forward for the record to industry and government. Because industry and government will often look for ways to downgrade the community's importance for the consultation process if you're not careful, if you're not doing that stuff in a consistent way. And then finally, it's to get that signed off on by the correct people, whether it's the lands director or whether it's the chief or whether it's chief and council overall, what approvals are required. And we have a little bit of a delegation of those authorities around approval system set up for that, and then it's about managing the follow-up. So sometimes you're making an information request, but saying the consultation process isn't over until you've got this information and been able to digest it and respond further. And sometimes it's about getting out onto the land, having a site visit, and a range of other things. So there's a lot of follow-up to manage from these responses and to track. Sorry, slide. So, you know, in general terms, we look at high priority projects as projects with the greatest impact on territory rights and interests. So for, you know, a really dramatic example, a major mining project comes to town and it's being proposed, and it's in the territory, it's maybe close to the reserve, it's going to really impact on community values. Cooks Ferry has got, they're in a gold belt area. And so mining is one of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis for Cooks Ferry. Low priority projects are things that are not likely to have impacts on your rights and interests or are happening outside the territory. And being able to identify something very quickly and say, okay, this isn't even anywhere near us, because government sometimes errs on the side of caution and, you know, throws stuff at you that are way outside of the territory. And, you know, low impact projects might be about the replacement of an existing culvert, for example. There's cases where that may become a medium or high priority if it's a really important spawning area, for example. But, and we are screening for that, but, you know, lots of things like, you know, somebody's dock on a lake or an existing culvert, those are things you don't want to spend a ton of time focusing on. And medium priority projects would be things that are in between. And we've scaled our approach to those responses as well. So low priority projects would have a very stock response, and a more generic response to just to kind of put things on the record. A medium priority response might have some more generic types of ways of responding, although be more of a customized response. We might apply certain kinds of environmental best practices in the way that we respond to that medium priority issue. High priority issue is going to be a comprehensive response, a comprehensive review, often involving experts who have specialized expertise in that review and response. So some detailed factors around that screening. We look at specific kinds of environmental risks. We look at proximity to reserve lands. We also look at the potential for economic benefits and participation in development. That is one of the key things we look at. And is there, you know, a potential for a particular project to get into a situation where we can develop an agreement between the community and industry for these kinds of benefits. Proximity to important traditional use and cultural heritage areas. And so that kind of information comes out of traditional use studies, what the chief referred to as TUSs a minute ago. And Cooks Ferry has, working with a couple of other bands, has developed a really cool terminology and way of categorizing these areas called cultural survival areas. So where you have a bunch of different cultural heritage and environmental factors coming together that would have made that area particularly important. So like a key hunting area or a place where there's a lot of spiritual and cultural values, a place for ceremony, and a place where there's a lot of abundance in nature. Those end up becoming identified as those cultural survival areas. Here's an example of the matrix. I won't go into detail, but this is one approach we've used for a community where we look at all these different factors together to categorize something as high, medium, or low importance. We use a little different approach with Cooks Ferry. This one is from a First Nation in Ontario. We use a different approach again for another nation we work for up in Northwest Territories. The key point here being that we don't take a generic approach. We work really closely with chief and council and other staff who are involved in the process early on to really identify the factors that matter the most to the community around deciding how to respond. For a high priority referral, the lands coordinator will generally package up the referral information, determine a timeline. Often those timelines are established by government or industry and how quickly they want a response back. Sometimes you reach out and ask for an extension if you think you need more time. You may develop or have meetings with other consultants or subject matter experts that would be involved. You make sure they're doing their review in a timely way. You set an internal deadline for review by other members of the lands department and as well by other staff potentially or chief and council. And you make sure that working backwards from that deadline, that external deadline, that you can meet that or ask for an extension for one you can meet. So as I mentioned earlier, sending that initial response is just the beginning. You may have follow-up responses or additional steps in the process to participate in. I just want to take a minute quickly to talk about data management tools. There's a number of different software solutions out there, and I'm happy to share some more information about that software. We have one we use called Consultation Tracker that we've developed. We also use Excel-based spreadsheets, and they can work just fine if you're not looking at if you're just looking at tracking those individual referrals. If you're not interested in kind of integrating things like traditional use data into the system and mapping and having an information base for all of your lands department information. But you can go simple or you can go really complex, but managing that data is a really all the stuff that comes through around referrals is a really important thing to do, and managing your base of information around the territory and cultural heritage and traditional use values is also very important. As I mentioned, we've had lots of sources of funding we've accessed. Some of them have been provincial, some of them have been federal. We often seek out capacity funding from proponents in order to fund the consultation that's happening and the responses that are required of that consultation. And I know Cooks Ferry has also used some of its core funding in part to develop the lands office. I'll maybe pause just for a second here and see, Chief, if you have anything you want to add from the slides that I've just whizzed through.
Not a whole lot. I think you've captured it all. The only point that I will note is that a lot of the funding opportunities that did come through to support the lands office, we weren't familiar with in-house to begin with, and that was one of the hesitations for years within the organization was, if we build the lands office, how do we support it? It would not be ideal to build it up if it couldn't sustain itself. So having expertise in-house that can search out that funding to support itself has been the one of the more successful components of this particular department.
Yeah, Thanks, Chief. And I'll just mention that there is quite a bit of funding from the province right now, or from the feds, related to the Trans Mountain pipeline, and also related to fisheries management issues, because there's a huge issue with salmon and steelhead in this part of BC, and working to try to recover that habitat. But there's also national funding that's come, that's more stock, not related just to issues, and both of those kinds of funding are available right now. And I'm happy to talk with anybody who would like around some potential funding sources you could access for a lands and consultation department. I think just kind of coming back to benefits and outsourcing. Chief maybe talked a little bit about this already. Chief, is there anything else you want to talk about your decisioning of outsourcing?
Largely, everything is, the successes anyway are based on relationships, whether it's internal relationships, governmental relationships, even to the proponents, but even our membership, and building those relationships with proven expertise has been what has stitched all those relationships together and built a really sound department in which we have confidence in and that we can lean on. So I think that beyond just leaning on our membership, because one thing in Indigenous organizations and governments is always pressure to hire within your membership, which is great if you have that expertise, but we don't necessarily all have that one individual or even a cohort of individuals who have that broad-based technical expertise. So outsourcing has been able to bring that in, but build the capacity. So kind of going out and bringing that capacity building concept in is a huge component on why we went out.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, I know we've used up most of our time. I'm able to stay a little bit longer. Elsie, I'm not sure if we're able to run the Zoom meeting a little bit longer. And Chief, I'm not sure if you're able to stay a little bit longer past the hour.
Yeah, I have a few minutes afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, we could stay on for a few minutes after 4.
Okay, that's great. Happy to take questions now. And maybe I'll ask if there was any questions that came up in the chat. I can't see the chat right now with my presentation up.
One question just came saying, do you have direct links for funding?
Yes, if you email me at my address at the end of this presentation, in another slide, I'm happy to provide some links to funding.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Mandy.
Hi, I just have a question. It may sound silly. I'm just kind of new to your organization. I was just wondering, in what capacity do you help First Nations with building their lands department? As your company, like how do you assist with that?
Well, I mean, the ways we've gone over in the presentation, finding funding, developing systems and processes to deal with referrals, and also to build up that information base around the territory and around reserve lands. We do sort of organizational development checks. We work to help develop capacity and do capacity building plans and sometimes training. Right now, Brenda Walkham, who is the lands coordinator for Cooks Ferry, for example, is really focused a lot on doing training for environmental monitors, environmental and cultural monitors, and also we have a general interest with Cooks Ferry and also with our other clients for helping to build guardians programs. That kind of day-to-day mentorship that comes with working alongside somebody local, which is always our goal when we start work with the lands department or consultation department, is to make sure there's somebody local there. We do a lot of that kind of day-to-day information sharing, because of course they've often got lots of really important knowledge of the territory and the community as well. Yeah, just sort of ongoing mentorship and coaching and development around the way that responses to government industry should be developed, and bring them along with meetings with industry and government and negotiations. And yeah, I mean, I think I could go on for a while, Mandy. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Maybe if I could just add to that, one of the initial steps that Shared Value and Scott took with Cooks Ferry was basically an interview process, getting to know Cooks Ferry and where we've been and where we want to be, and finding out what was important to us, getting familiar with their territory and the types of proponents that are in the area, just to inform themselves on how they could fit in, because each community will be different. So there was a get to know you kind of process at the front end of this to shape what we were looking at coming out of it. And as we evolved through the year, and given we've been through hell and back in the last year here in Cooks Ferry, we've kind of manipulated the process along the way to further refine it to be a better responsive process.
Yeah, no, that sounds all really great, actually. I work in our consultation department, but I mainly focus on archaeology. However, we are technically up and running, but, as I'm sure everybody knows, just the sheer volume of requests coming in, it's just overwhelming. And, like Scott had said, you feel like you can never get out from under it. So, I'm interested in possibly connecting with your company to help us start building capacity and basically just try to run this smoother, because, like I said, we started bringing in revenue. We're doing, kind of okay, but I feel like we could be doing a lot better. And like I said, I'm not overly familiar with this company. However, I have been checking out resources you've been providing and downloading certain things, and I'm very interested. And I would like to possibly chat later if that's possible.
Absolutely. And I recognize your name. I feel like we may have run into each other sometime in Ontario. Yeah, nice to meet you, Mandy. And Laura Sayers, who from SVS, who I know is on the line. Laura, I'm wondering if you could put my email and cell phone number into the chat.
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I'll just say.
Yeah, Mandy, I know you're driving, but hopefully you have access to that as well.
There's a comment in the chat, Doug Ray, and nice to see you, Doug. It's been a minute since we've seen. He writes, in negotiating with industry, in your view, what factors that a First Nation brings to the table result in the biggest bang for the buck, recognizing, of course, that simple dollars are not the only points of any negotiations? Yeah,
well, I think rights and territory are something that that nations bring to the table, bands bring to the table, depending on what part of the country you're in, how that's referred to. So that's often the thing that gets industry to the table initially. Is the fact that rights and title are a necessary ingredient to a major project going forward. Making sure those are accommodated where there are rights impacts, and that the community can consent to the project going ahead. In BC, this is particularly important because of the DRIPA legislation, Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, that's come through and is now being implemented. Canada's fully signed on to the UN Declaration, of course. We're waiting on legislation coming from the feds too around this, but many proponents are acting proactively to deal with the issue of informed consent in the process. So those are two kind of key pieces, but of course, communities bring local labor force, they bring local companies, they bring, in my opinion, when a good relationship has been developed, that relationship goes both ways, and often they can rely on the Indigenous community too, where they've developed agreements and relationships formally. They can rely on those communities to also support them in other ways, and to speak to the positive working relationship they have. Of course, that's something that can be fragile and needs to be maintained, and there needs to be processes for making sure that relationship is kept whole and continues to be good. And that's often a key part of, in my experience, an agreement. The way that I like to negotiate at the table is in a way that looks for common interests and is focused on making sure there are those kinds of accommodations and benefits coming out of the process, but making sure that there can be a good relationship at the end of the negotiation. And that when an agreement's formed, a lot of that agreement is about the implementation. I've rambled again, Doug. I hope that helps to answer your question. Nice to see your name up here as well. I know you're legal counsel for another client of ours too, so glad you could join us.
There's one more question in chat from Eliza Heidsmith. Can you speak to the ways in which creating a lands department can provide capacity for communities to build sovereignty over their data and information?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really hot topic right now, as I'm sure you're aware, data sovereignty. I spoke to that slide about data management earlier, and I really feel strongly that developing the technical capacity and the human capital kind of capacity, i.e. expertise and experience in using those tools is really important. That's an important part of capacity development. And that's really crucial to having data sovereignty. I think the community being able to take back its data when it may be in outside organizations, and making sure another key tool in my perspective is establishing data sharing and use agreements, whether it's with proponents, whether it's with government, to make sure that the terms around using information, sharing information, and about consent for how that information is used are laid down in agreement and made very clear. So, off the top of my head, those are kind of three major ways: technical literacy in systems, making sure that you're able to where information, your data is in outside organizations, where can you get that back in house, and then developing appropriate terms for protecting that information, having intellectual property recognized, and making sure that the terms around sharing that information are very clear. Hope that answers your question.